When Danny Boulder of Houston, Texas, took a solo trip to Mexico, he found a stray kitten in a terrible state. Against the locals' advice, he brought the kitten back to the United States with the intention of nursing it back to health. He was a regular Good Samaritan, always looking to do a good deed. However, a few days later, 2 police officers showed up at his door. It was clear to Danny that he had made a huge mistake trying to do what he thought was best for the cat. Danny realized something important. He should have left the kitten where he found it.
Stop using social networks for free. If you would like to know how you can earn at least $25 an hour from home doing what you already do today, just do the application, which takes less than 1 minute, but after watching this video.
One day, Danny was startled by a loud knock on the front door. Living in quite a remote area, he was a bit apprehensive about who could be at his home. When he looked through the window, he saw 2 policemen pounding on his door. Well, pounding was an understatement. It was so loud he thought they were breaking in. There was a certain urgency in that knock which made Danny's heart race. Why would the police be here? What did they want from him? The moment he opened the door, the officers barged into his house. Danny tried to stop them and demanded an explanation, but all they asked was, "Where is he? Where's the cat?" They said it in such an alarmed and panicked tone. To say he was confused was an understatement. Danny couldn't believe this was really about the stray kitten he found while on vacation. What kind of cat was this that warranted a police visit to his home? What had he gotten himself into? However, when one of the officers finally explained why they were searching for the cat, everything made sense to Danny. There was no way he could keep this animal. Knowing what he knows now, he wishes the connection had never existed. Many questions were swirling in his mind at that moment, all of them grim. But what was wrong with this kitten? Should Danny have left it behind when he found it? And why did the police have to get involved? At the time of the incident, Danny was a single man. He was the kind who enjoyed that kind of life, where he had the freedom to do as he pleased. And that kind of thinking was probably what led him into this misadventure. The moment Danny noticed the stray kitten, he immediately felt he couldn't leave the poor creature behind. It kept mewing and purring. He felt his heart break. Apparently, he was the only one around who felt that way, since no passerby paid the poor animal any attention. Danny was on a solo vacation in Mexico at that time and was visiting a small village when he first saw the kitten. It was covered in dirt from living on the streets and obviously very weak. His heart was shattered by the sight. It seemed like the kitten was an orphan, as its mother was nowhere to be seen. Danny thought he could probably take care of this kitten while trying to figure out a way to make its situation more permanent and comfortable. As Danny stood there, the tiny kitten slowly approaching him, the villagers were shouting at him not to pick up or touch the creature. "No lo toque! No lo toque!" Danny kept hearing the same phrase repeatedly. His phrase book informed him of the meaning. At first, Danny wanted to ask why he shouldn't, but his Spanish wasn't good enough to ask, let alone understand the response. But the villagers seemed very agitated at the sight of the kitten, although Danny had no idea why. With the kitten now climbing onto his boot, Danny decided for himself that those villagers were probably just teasing him, as everyone loved to play with foreigners visiting their village. Against his better judgment, and the villagers, he picked up the kitten. It was odd that the villagers told him not to take the cat. The animal was so sweet. The kitten immediately snuggled into him when he picked it up. Danny thought maybe they wanted to keep the kitten to use it as livestock feed. He swiftly but carefully picked up the animal and started walking back to the car amid shouts from the local villagers. They chased him to the car, asking him to let go of the cat. "Deje el gato! Deje el gato!" He could hear a mix of reactions from them, but he couldn't comprehend what they were trying to say. His phrase book covered a lot, and this was an unusual situation to start with. Danny could understand there were emotions ranging from anger to indifference. Danny opened the car, wrapped the kitten in an old sweater, and quickly drove off before any of the villagers could try to stop him. He didn't understand why there was so much fuss over the kitten. It seemed like a disproportionate response for such a small creature. But figuring out the commotion was the furthest thing from Danny's mind now. All he could think about was giving food and water to the poor creature and then taking it to an animal shelter. Time was of the essence, and the cat seemed to worsen with every passing minute. Danny began to drive without any idea of where he would end up. He was just in search of a larger town where they might have pet stores or at least sell proper kitten food. This was the first time he had to care for a cat, after all. Danny had no idea what to do except what he found in a quick Google search. There was a bit of urgency as he realized the kitten was very hungry and running out of energy. That's when he noticed something very crucial. Throughout this ordeal, Danny had fallen deeply in love with this tiny creature. After all, he was an animal lover at heart, and in his heart he couldn't leave this kitten alone. He decided he would do whatever he could to help. He had already forgotten the shouts, and all the unclear warnings from the local villagers had been pushed to the back of his mind. The traveler felt it was his mission to give this beautiful creature another chance at life. So Danny resolved to give the cat the help it needed. Initially, he wanted to leave the kitten at a local shelter when he returned to his home in the United States. However, given the grim conditions in that part of Mexico, he had no idea about the quality of life those shelters could offer. Should he just keep her with him? Despite the seemingly poor conditions, he knew he couldn't leave the kitten even if he wanted to. Danny had already started forming a bond with the animal, and the only logical solution seemed to be taking her home with him. After the kitten had eaten and drank a bit, she seemed to revive a little. It was about a day of continuous driving to get back home to Houston, Texas. The kitten, growing increasingly curious, explored every nook of Danny's car along the way. Since he had nothing to contain the animal, Danny decided not to make an effort to hide her. He would be crossing the border soon. When Danny passed through the border checkpoint, he immediately faced some questions about the kitten. He told them he was traveling the world with his cat, and there wasn't much else to say. The border guards exchanged a few phrases amongst themselves, but Danny got permission to continue driving quite swiftly. As usual, it was bustling at the border. Danny figured they didn't want to spend much time arguing about why he'd bring a kitten back to the United States, considering there were probably many other things demanding their attention. Danny felt relieved to be allowed to continue his journey to bring his furry friend to what he hoped would be her forever home. He had always dreamt of having a pet cat, so this situation felt like his dream had truly come true. However, after a while, it turned out this wouldn't be the case. Danny has a heart of gold, which was further evidenced by bringing a lost kitten off the streets of Mexico into his home. He was not naive, though, as he realized a stray kitten could also carry countless diseases. So, he decided to schedule an appointment with the veterinarian once he got home. Fortunately, Danny managed to go straight to the vet the next day. He was the first appointment of the day, so he had to wake up early. Despite waking up early, he was almost late because of the kitten who wouldn't let herself be caught. While Missy continued to elude him, Danny realized he needed to give her a name. He decided he would call her Missy from now on. Missy seemed too curious for her own good, as Danny constantly lost sight of her. She was small enough to fit into anywhere she pleased and did so with gusto. Danny finally found her under the sink just in time to make it to the vet appointment. However, to his surprise, it seemed Missy was now much less willing to be caught compared to yesterday. He would soon find out why. Perhaps it was because she had gained some strength, and her survival instincts kicked in more, but every time Danny tried to grab her, he was almost bitten. He even seemed to hear her growl. Danny had never experienced this before. So he thought of something that might help. With the help of some gloves, he managed to place her in his old cat's cage, and they went to the vet. Danny really hoped this change in behavior was just temporary. He was getting a bit tired of all the loud hissing. How was it possible for Missy to hiss so loudly? During the trip to the vet, it became clear that Missy was stressed and wanted out of the cage as fast as possible. She hissed constantly and scratched at the cage's interior. Danny tried to calm her down, but when he moved his hand towards the cage, she immediately scratched him. After Danny arrived, the vet said it would be best to sedate the kitten. That way he could examine her safely. As Danny told him he had picked the poor animal off the streets, the vet questioned how the weak kitten would react to the injection. The vet judged that Missy seemed very weak and malnourished, so an anesthetic could lead to death in such a case. With no other options, the vet decided to open the cage and take Missy out. But when he got a bit closer, he was immediately scratched by her. What to do now? After some discussion, Danny and the vet decided it was best to take Missy back home. Danny was instructed to strengthen her in the coming days so she would be fit enough to be sedated. The vet gave him a bag of special cat food that should speed up this process. This might also help with the kitten's aggressive behavior. If an animal feels better, it often starts behaving better too. Danny took the kitten back home but wasn't very satisfied with the outcome. What was even worse was the fact that the vet was also planning something else. The vet didn't tell Danny the exact truth, as he was concerned about the consequences of confronting him. He felt it wasn't his place to tell him such things. That's why the vet picked up his phone and called the police to inform them so they could take care of this animal. The vet never intended to examine Missy. He had already sensed that something was wrong the moment they walked through the door. He used Missy's weakness as an excuse to get Danny out of the clinic so he could call the police and let them handle it. Danny had no idea about the vet's true intentions. He was just going to do as he was told. Bring Missy back home and start giving her the special food to help her strengthen. On the way back, Missy finally calmed down. He was even able to pet her a little. It was at this moment that Danny thought everything would be fine. But would it? When they got back home, Danny poured the food he got from the vet into her bowl. It was according to his expectations that she would start eating as if her life depended on it. She was a very hungry cat, and Danny was happy to see her eating. However, that's not what was happening. In fact, it was exactly the opposite of Danny's expectations. She took a bite, spat it out, and started hiding again. This wasn't characteristic of a hungry cat. Shouldn't a starving animal be eager and willing to eat whatever was in front of it? Danny realized she might still be a bit stressed from the trip and just left her alone for a while, hoping she would come back to the food eventually. However, he was increasingly regretting the decision to take the cat with him. It had truly been a hassle. Unknown to Danny, it was about to get much worse than the current situation. Danny was looking out the window when he saw a police car with 2 officers pull up in front of his house. The man immediately noticed they weren't coming for a peaceful chat. They were really looking for something. They rushed to his porch and began pounding on his door urgently. Danny was startled by the force with which they were banging on his door. The man couldn't fathom why the police would be at his house. He had never done anything wrong. Immediately, he ran to the door to open it and offer peace of mind to whoever was doing this. Danny swung the door open and started greeting the officers, but before he could say anything, he was pushed, so to speak, and the police officers rushed in. The young man was stunned for a moment and couldn't understand why all this was happening. When Danny realized they just brushed past him without giving a reason, he began to grow angry. He ran back into the living room and shouted, "I demand an explanation!" During the search, one of the officers shouted that they were looking for the monster. What did they mean by that? All Danny could think was that they must be after Missy. But how could they know the cat was in his house? And worse, why were they calling her a monster? Before he could confirm or deny their claims, Missy had already shown her curious face. "There she is," one of the officers yelled. The police quickly went after her, chasing Missy around the house until they managed to corner her. Danny could only watch in horror and shock as all of this unfolded right before his eyes. He was still waiting for an answer about why they were after his cat and was beginning to lose patience. The police officers were clearly prepared to chase and capture Missy, wearing thick gloves and even bringing a net and a cage, which was still sitting by his door. Danny walked over to the front door to shut it and noticed an animal control van passing by his porch. After a while, the officers finally managed to restrain Missy. Obviously, the animal did not agree and was furious in the net it was caught in. Well, at least some semblance of peace returned to the house. Now Danny wanted to know what the heck was going on. The officer told him that they didn't know why they were here either and that they were just following orders. All they knew was that the tip came from the local vet and that Danny should probably call him for some answers. Wait, what? The vet called the police? As the officers put Missy in the cage and loaded her into the car, Danny immediately dialed the vet's number. He called the vet's assistant because the vet himself needed to urgently go somewhere else. It was clear from her reaction that she was expecting this call. The vet's assistant explained that he had lied to Danny and concealed the truth about his new companion out of fear that he wouldn't take the news well. In his mind, It was better if the police dealt with it. Apparently, it was a very special situation. The vet immediately realized that Danny hadn't really brought a sick kitten with him, but a young Mexican lynx in danger. Later that day, Danny was called in to give a statement on how he came into possession of the lynx. This was something he should not be possessing under any circumstances. That's the main reason why the vet wanted police involvement. Additionally, the vet was afraid of getting into conflict and decided it was better to report these illegal cases to the police. Later that day, Danny was called in to give a statement on how he had come into possession of the lynx. Though his true story might sound a bit exaggerated, the police believed it enough to reach the final decision. The authorities decided not to press further charges against him after searching his house and finding no evidence of illegal practices. The lynx was handed over to a rescue center where it would be allowed to grow for a year or two and then would be sent back to Mexico.